O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. Thou knowest my downsitting and my uprising. Thou understandest my thought afar off. Thou compassest my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word in my tongue, but O Lord, thou knowest it altogether. Thou hast beset me behind and before, and laid thine hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's high, I cannot attain unto it. Verse 1. God searches every man. 1 Chronicles chapter 28 verse 9. And knows him. Jeremiah chapter 6 verse 19. Daniel chapter 2 verse 29. And Matthew chapter 9 verse 4. David asked to be searched in this same psalm, verse 23. When you search for something, you hunt for it till you find it. Job chapter 28 verse 3, Romans chapter 8 verse 27. The Spirit searcheth all things, 1 Corinthians chapter 2 verse 10, and the things that God knows about man from having searched him out. Job chapter 11 verse 11, Psalm chapter 10 verse 15. And they are these. He knows when a man sits down, lies down, and gets up, verse 2 and 3. He knows every word that a man says, verse 4. He knows all the thoughts that go through a man's head, verse 2. He knows what is behind the man and what is in front of him, verse 5. He knows the man's personal habits, verse 3. If this is true, do you mean to tell me that the man who fears God doesn't even tremble and shake in his boots? I don't believe a word of it. If a man isn't scared slap out of his skin at times by the words of God in that book, it's because he doesn't think God knows what he's doing or thinking at certain times. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, verse 6. How absolutely true. This explains why atheists and agnostics rule God out, since their feeble, finite, puny brains cannot comprehend a being who can perceive the minds, words, works, events, and calamities that are connected with 3 billion people at one time. They just decide in their own favor. There isn't any such thing. If I cannot understand him, he doesn't exist. There, that takes care of that. Well, it seals your damnation, if that is what you mean. How often, O Lord, my God, how often I have flown over huge cities and looked down at the teeming interstates and clover leaves and said to myself, how on earth could God know what is going on in every car down there, including the conversations, and still know the thoughts of every passenger in this plane? Then it gets worse. He said that he knows the conversation going on in every bedroom, office, dining room, living room, backyard, restaurant, and shower room in that town, while keeping track of the same material in the last 10 towns I just flew over. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's high, I cannot attain unto it. No, I sure can't. But I get one thing. I get one message. If God is like that, and Psalm chapter 139 says he is, can you imagine such a God losing the words he wants me to read and memorize, so that I might not sin against him? Why, that is absolutely preposterous. Every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. Matthew chapter 12 verse 36. God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing. Ecclesiastes chapter 12 verse 14. In the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ. Romans chapter 2 verse 16. Are you ready to have your secrets judged? Einstein wasn't at any time in his life. Neither were Karl Marx, Martin Luther King Jr., Mikhail Gorbachev, Spiro Agnew, Joseph Stalin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Hitler, Hirohito, Castro, Jack Kennedy, Henry Kissinger, Tip O'Neill, Lenin, or Freud. A man who is prepared to have his secrets judged only got prepared one way, and then men listed above never professed to have taken that way. John chapter 14, verses 1 to 6. Neither did any Roman Catholic pope since 300 Anno Domini. The tragic fact is that no man's life would pass such a judgment, no matter how good he was. And although God allowed this under the law, see Ezekiel chapter 14, verse 14, and winked at it under conscience, Acts chapter 17, verse 30. There are no longer any loopholes, Acts chapter 17, verse 31. You will have to have God's righteousness 100%, perfect, sinless, holiness, to get by, Romans chapter 10, verses 1 to 3. Your secrets will have to remain secret under the blood in order for you to enter a city where anything that defiled shall not enter, Revelation chapter 21, verse 27. Even in the tribulation, faith in Christ is required, Revelation chapter 7, verse 14, chapter 14, verse 12. And the blood of the Lamb is necessary for the secret things, Revelation chapter 12, verse 11. The requirement in this age for salvation is sinless perfection. You cannot get it apart from the finished blood atonement of a perfectly sinless man, Hebrews chapter 10, verses 8 to 12, Romans chapter 3, verses 21 to 25, chapter 5, verses 1 to 10. Whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning, and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. Yet the darkness hideth not from thee, but the night shineth as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to thee. This section is on the omnipresence of God. Jonah, trying to flee from the presence of the Lord, is like a little boy covering his eyes with his hands and saying to his father, I will bet you can't find me now. Everyone is familiar with this section that converts God is nowhere to God is now here. Running from God is the most futile race a man ever run. He said that he filled heaven and earth, Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 24, at the same time, when he boasted about his omnipotence and his omniscience, Isaiah chapter 44, verses 6 to 9, and 24, 25, 26, and chapter 25, verses 5 to 12, and verse 19 and 20, chapter 46, verse 4, 5 and 9, and 10, and chapter 48, verses 3 to 8, verse 12, 13, 17, 18, and chapter 49, verse 5, 6, 7, 18. He took time out to ridicule modern man. See Isaiah chapter 40, verse 15, 16, 17, 25, 26, and chapter 41, verse 21, 22, 23, and 24, and challenged him to prove that he was anything more than a total blank, Isaiah chapter 41, verse 24, and that anyone who followed man wasn't an abomination, Isaiah chapter 41, verse 24. In the book, modern man is deceived, self-righteous, fool, and that is why modern man is against the book. David had much more scientific knowledge about these matters than Planck, Heisenberg, Einstein, Oparin, Salk, Curie, and von Braun. In verses 7 and 8, David states that he couldn't get out of God's presence even in hell. If we live and move in him and have our being in him, Acts chapter 17, verse 28, we would have to get outside the universe to get out of him. And then you would find that if the universe were limited, its creator is not. This cosmological truth, verse 8, has a terrible reality for lost men and women, because it means that since our God is consuming fire, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 29, the lake of fire, Revelation chapter 20, verse 14, is a manifestation of one of God's attributes, his wrath. When David says these words, hell can be anywhere in hell. Abraham's bosom, paradise, Tartarus, or the fiery hell. But in eternity, death and hell have been cast into the lake of fire, so it doesn't do the Alexandrians any good to quibble about hell in the passage before us, although all of them will. They like hellless Bibles. It makes them feel more comfortable and helps their testimony. Hell, for an unsaved man, is the presence of God. The trouble with this presence is the holy, pure, spotless, sinless, white-hot heat of absolute, eternal energy. Einstein knew nothing about it, but he does now. God was present in the den of lions, Daniel chapter 6 verse 16, but only for its first occupant. The next shift, Daniel chapter 6 verse 24, found out that being in God's presence didn't do anything for them. What is meant for one man is poison for another. See Psalm chapter 136 and comments. God's eternal sinless presence will be heaven for the saved, for they will be like him. 1 John chapter 3 verses 1-3. The problem is conversation. Before the sinner can adjust to his eternal company, his body must be converted into a sinless, holy body of pure energy. See Hebrews chapter 1 verse 7. Without the new birth in this age, it's impossible. Hell for an unsaved man in this age doesn't come as the vengeful act of an outraged torture master, like the college and university professor put it. It comes as the perfectly natural consequence of sinners' deliberate and willful rejection of the alternative. It's the natural and predictable result of refusing to be converted. If I take the wings of the morning, verse 9, here is one expression that is plainly poetic and figurative. Two ideas are involved. The first is that the morning literally takes off faster than a jet. The wings of the eagle, Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 11, and the peacock, Job chapter 39 verse 13, can't keep up with it. No bird could outfly the dawn, which moves around the earth at better than 1,000 miles an hour at the equator. Again, considering the speed of light, when the sun appears above the horizon, its beams would be traveling at least 100,000 times faster than the fastest jet in the 20th century. Thus, two things are involved: the flight of light and the flight of the sun itself as it appears from the earth. For the saint, God is not only a presence, but he is led by God and held by God, verse 10, in the sense of divine guidance and protection. There is no darkness nor shadow of death where the workers of iniquity may hide themselves. Job chapter 34 verse 22 is the theme of verses 11 and 12. The book of Job is full of this. See Job chapter 12 verse 22, chapter 28 verse 3, chapter 38 verse 19. When the lights go out in Egypt, Exodus chapter 10 verses 21 to 23, the Lord is not going to lose anything in the dark or need a flashlight to get around. You will need it, not him. God can dwell in thick darkness, Exodus chapter 20 verse 21, and you can't. 3 months in solitary in a cell where there is no light of any kind, 24 hours a day, can drive a man crazy. Ask Harlan Popov or Richard Wurmbrand or a dozen others if this is so, when you see them in glory. Unlike the yin and yang dual nature of reality taught by the Orientals, God condemns any fool who pretends that light and darkness are the same or that they are interchangeable. Isaiah chapter 5 verse 20. God created both. Isaiah chapter 45 verse 7. So to him they are the same. The attempt of some to play God by thinking themselves into God's position, see John chapter 1 verse 13, doesn't work. He knoweth what is in the darkness. Daniel chapter 2 verse 22. Writer and Bible commentator Spurgeon does his best to rid the non-elect of their fear of hell. He says, whatever Hades may be or whoever may be there, you mean a sovereignly elected, so-called elect, doesn't know who is there. Charlie, one thing is certain, thou, O Jehovah, art there. Then just to make sure that non-elect are not duly upset by their future, Spurgeon quotes the verse again and purposely omits in hell. He says, whatever we rise up or lie down, take our wing or make our bed, we shall find God near us. Hell in some places in Scripture signifies the lower parts of the earth without relation to punishment. Joseph Carroll. Well, none of you one time yet have associated it with punishment. So if anyone read your commentaries, they would assume there never was any punishment there. Albert Barnes gives you the deepest abode of the dead. The deepest abode. You mean their bodies are lower than Cascade Caverns? Abode. Are they living? If it were the lowest parts of the earth, why didn't the psalmist write it what way he did later in the same psalm, verse 15? No hell in Dummelo, 1-volume commentary. No hell in the ASV or New ASV. No hell in the RSV or New RSV. No hell in the Living Bible or the New English Bible. No hell in the New International Version. No one likes to talk about hell. Fundamentalists are afraid to say the word also. Many of the commentaries, there are no comments on hell. Conservatives are afraid to say the word. If I didn't know any better, I would suspect that all the conservatives who wrote these commentaries never preach publicly on hell. A modern fundamentalist who attends a World Congress of Fundamentalism is careful not to talk about hell where someone can quote him. Suppose that the reference was to the underworld in general instead of specifically a place of punishment. What then? Death and hell are cast into the lake of fire, Revelation chapter 20 verse 16. What then? If an Old Testament saint hadn't yet received the revelation of 2 or 3 compartments in Sheol, that would not change the fact that an unsaved man in a burning hell is still in the presence of God. You see what they did. This time in violation of their habitual and continual practice through 138 psalms, they stuck to the bare skeleton of the doctrine and avoided any ramifications or overtones that were involved in it. Elsewhere, Psalm chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, etc., they immediately went off into flights of fancy that covered every facet of verse except its doctrinal application. Isn't it strange how doctrinally accurate these apostates get when faced with hell? Yes, I think it is. So again, let God be true, but every man a liar.